Ms. Abrams, it's been over 2 years, and you still refuse to concede that you lost the race for governor in Georgia in 2018. You have said that, quote, you do not concede that the process was proper, and that, quote, they stole it from the voters of Georgia. Yes or no, today, do you still maintain that the 2018 Georgia election was stolen?
As I've always said, I acknowledged at the very beginning that Brian Kemp won under the rules that were in place. What I object to are rules that permitted thousands of Georgia voters to be denied their participation in this election or to have their votes cast out. And so I will continue to disagree with the system until it is fixed. We have seen marked progress made, and unfortunately it was undone in SB 202, but I will continue to advocate for a system that permits every eligible Georgian to cast their ballots.
Ms. Abrams, I'm going to ask you to please answer the question I asked, which is, do you, yes or no, do you still maintain the 2018 election was stolen? That's your language.
My full language was that it was stolen from the voters of Georgia. We do not know what they would have done because not every eligible Georgian was permitted to participate fully in the election.
So you also told the New York Times that your loss, quote, was fully attributable to voter suppression. Ms. Abrams, do you know in Georgia whether the percentage of African-American Georgians who are registered to vote and who turned out to vote, is it higher or lower than the national average?
It is higher than the national average because Georgia is one of the largest states with an African-American population.
But that's not tied to the size of the population. The percentage of black Georgians who are registered to vote in 2018 is 64.7%. That compares to 60.2% as the national average. The percentage of Georgians who voted in 2018, the election you claim was stolen from you, was 56.3%. That's higher than the national average of 48%. Let me ask you this, Ms. Abrams. In 2018, do you know which demographic group in Georgia had the highest registration percentage and the highest turnout percentage?
I have a guess, but I will defer to you for the answer.
The answer is African Americans had the highest registration and the highest turnout, despite your claiming that the election was stolen and there was somehow voter suppression.
This is Ted Cruz trying to gin up some type of gotcha question for Stacey Abrams by distorting why she had refused to concede the gubernatorial race to Brian Kemp in 2018. And so he tries to force her to answer a yes or no question despite misrepresenting the basis of that question, although Abrams was obviously in no mood for Cruz's bad faith antics. Now, clearly what Cruz is trying to do is equate the situation in Georgia with Donald Trump's situation in the general election. And so by presenting this in such a way that has the exact same verbiage on the heels of Trump's defeat, it's obvious that Cruz is trying to suggest that Democrats are okay claiming stolen elections when they say it, but not okay with stolen elections when Republicans say it. But so that we're clear, while Republicans like Cruz would love to create this false equivalency, these two things are in no way the same. Brian Kemp won the Georgia election by about 55,000 votes. At the same time, while he opted not to recuse himself as then Secretary of State overseeing that election, Kemp oversaw an aggressive effort to purge voters, with 700,000 voters removed from the rolls in the year before the election. And for over 100,000 of them, the only reason they were removed was simply because they hadn't voted in prior elections. He placed 53,000 voter registrations in electoral limbo as a result of an exact match policy where a single digit or misplaced hyphen could derail the registration. And approximately 70% of those 53,000 were black voters. More than 200 polling places across the state were closed, and they just so happened to be primarily in poor and minority neighborhoods, which tend to vote for Democrats. Research also shows that for every 1/10 of a mile that a polling station is removed from the black community, black voter turnout declines by 0.5%. Voters also reported long lines, malfunctioning voting machines, and other problems that cause delays. And delays in lines are known to cause people to leave and not vote. In total, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution found that precinct closures and long distances to polling locations prevented approximately 54,000 to 85,000 voters from casting ballots. So when Stacey Abrams suggests that the election was stolen, there is actual evidence that she can point to. Contrast that with Donald Trump's claims that the election was stolen, which, by the way, he started making before a single ballot was cast. Here's a statement from August.
Just make sure your vote gets counted. Make sure, because the only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that. It's the only way we're going to lose this election.
In other words, he was broadcasting that he was going to say the election was stolen regardless of the evidence. He gave the entire game away. And even when the election was over, remember, he lost 64 to 65 cases in the courts, with the only win shortening a cure deadline in Pennsylvania from 9 to 6 days. Republican governors and Republican secretaries of state said it wasn't stolen. Bill Barr and the DOJ said it wasn't stolen. Chris Krebs and the DHS's cybersecurity unit said it wasn't stolen. Mitch McConnell and Mike Pence said it wasn't stolen. So while the MAGA crowd likes to delude themselves to make the pain of losing easier to swallow, that isn't going to manifest those delusions into reality. I mean, the difference couldn't be more obvious. Donald Trump lost despite a system rigged in his favor by Republicans across the country, and yet still maintains that he somehow won. Stacey Abrams lost because of a system that was rigged against her, and yet accepted the results regardless, even though she maintains that that system needs to be reformed, and that was responsible for her loss. These are not the same, regardless of how much Ted Cruz wants to pretend that it is. But all of that aside, it's what Ted Cruz said next that was just the peak of bad faith. Cruz suggests that because the percentage of black Georgians who registered and turned out was higher than the national average, that's evidence that the election wasn't stolen. Here's the thing, just because black Georgians turned out in higher numbers doesn't mean that black Georgians also weren't suppressed. These things aren't in the least bit mutually exclusive. All it means is that A, had those Georgians not been suppressed, that percentage would have been even higher, and B, it's a testament to the success of voter registration and advocacy groups in Georgia, including Stacey Abrams' own organization, Fair Fight. But to claim that high black turnout means suppression can't also exist is insultingly misguided. The simple fact is that high turnout was in no way because of Brian Kemp or Georgia Republicans' efforts, it was despite Kemp's efforts. You don't get credit for black Georgians showing up in record numbers to vote when you instituted the racially discriminatory exact match program. You don't get credit for black Georgians showing up to vote in record numbers when you had poll closures in poor and minority neighborhoods. And the fact that Cruz thinks he can convince people that you can goes to show just how shameless he is. And one last point. I find it especially funny that Ted Cruz is so concerned about Georgia now, just like he was so concerned about canceling the election results in the so-called disputed states during the November election. The guy is so wrapped up in every other state, and yet when the state of Texas was mired in a devastating crisis just a few weeks ago, when it was finally Ted Cruz's time to focus on his own constituents, the guy packed a bag and grabbed the first flight to the Ritz-Carlton in Cancun. Too bad Texas' senator can't manage to find the same enthusiasm for his own state as he has for every other state. So Republicans will continue to desperately justify their own efforts to ensure that fewer people who vote for Democrats will be able to cast ballots, but we can see right through these tactics, and I can assure you, so can the voters of Georgia. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. And for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I discuss the week's top stories and interview major players in the world of politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.